The following is a presentation of Western Farmers Electric Cooperative.
Welcome back into another podcast of Mark Smiles. I'm Howie Jackson, Information Specialist with Western Farmers Electric Cooperative, and with me again is Mark Faulkenberry, Vice President and in charge of Member Relations and Communications. Mark, welcome in, and man, you and I both like barbecue, especially some smoked sausage, and let's talk a little bit about some of these numbers that we've got and how the sausage is made. And we're on the August edition of Mark Smiles, and also Show Me the Money, and you have a spreadsheet that we're going to be diving into today. So let's just get right into it, Mark. Show us how the sausage is made. Let's get into the dirty details here on how we're going to find out how much savings we're actually getting from this F-150 Lightning. You've been driving this thing all over the place. We've had some road trips and we've had some trips to the airport, and so we're going to talk about how you're getting these numbers today. We're also going to talk about the big one, which is cost per kilowatt hour. You're going to hear that referenced a lot in today's podcast. And then also the difference between the price on the charging, Mark. That's going to make a big difference on what we're going to look at today. So just go ahead and lead us through this here.
Okay. First of all, I got to give credit where credit's due. When I first started talking to my team about how I wanted to present this information, how I came up with the idea of doing this podcast, putting in kind of a Zoom format where you could actually see the numbers, because otherwise trying to write out all of the detail, this is a fairly simple concept. And all it is trying to show the economic savings of fuel savings, predominantly of driving my Ford F-150 Lightning for the first 6 months of this project compared to driving my old 2019 GMC Denali pickup. And fuel savings isn't the only piece that we're looking at. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of oil changes, but those are a couple of items that really can't be debated, so they're very straightforward. I wanted to keep this simple, but there's a lot of number crunching to make this sausage, and we thought this might be the easiest format. So Howie, thanks for a great idea of being able to demonstrate. What I'm going to do is we're just going to take a few minutes and quickly walk through a template that I designed that each month I put all of the data in. So Howie has it up. Let's take a look. If you're looking at the miles driven each month, first thing you got to know is how many miles did I drive? So I just take an odometer reading as a start and a stop, and you can see that I stopped at 5835, and we ended up with 2,049 miles that I drove that particular month. We also put beside that a total of all of the kilowatt hours I purchased from all three of the charging locations that we'll be going through that lie below this. This number gives us then how many miles per kilowatt hour that I averaged with a vehicle. You'll find if you drive an EV, that becomes a fairly important number to you because it's very similar to miles per gallon. It's how you start to equate the economics of what's happening. So first thing we do, we get that monthly odometer reading. The second thing we do is we go to my home charger. Thank goodness for my home charger. I love having the flexibility that it offers. And what it is, we inserted a meter to that circuit so that I can measure the number of kilowatt hours. You'll see at the start of the month, we started at 238. That end of the month, I stopped at 758, leaving us a total of 475. I then take, when I get my power bill, I go in and I look at the rate that I'm being charged. I am an OG&E customer. On my EV rate, they charge me 2.6 cents for every kilowatt hour from 11 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning. I have my truck programmed so it will only charge during that period of time so that I'm controlling the economics. And so each month, all I have to do is go and adjust the PCA or the fuel rate that I get on my power bill, and that creates a subtotal for me. In this particular month, it was $27.41. And then I have to factor in the sales tax that would be calculated in my bill, which is 4.5. And that brings that total to 28. And from that, I'm quickly able to say, well, how many dollars per kilowatt hour, cents per kilowatt hour? In this particular month, I paid OG&E 6.03 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay. The key numbers here is that total, including the tax, and then also that average cost per kilowatt. So then we go to workplace charging. Okay. Western Farmers is fortunate that we have level 2 workplace charging at all of our corporate facilities. I predominantly frequent the Moore office and the Anadarko office. And what you're seeing right below that, our office in Moore is served retail by Oklahoma Electric Cooperative. We are fortunate that when we were designing our building, OEC literally created a rate not only for Western, but for corporations that wanted to do EV charging. You see it clearly reflected in the rate signal they provide. And basically, it's a cost plus rate structure with Western Farmers. And it sends a very clear signal for me to charge this vehicle off of 2 key timeframes. One of those is from 6 to 9 in the morning. The other one is from 4 to 7 in the evening. That's traditionally when Western's peaking billing determinants are charged. So if I'm able to charge outside of those windows, then I'm able to get this really attractive energy rate that you're seeing in front of you. So again, each month I have to get the purchase cost adjustment off the OEC bill. I have to then go and see what Western Farmers charged OEC for that energy. And I also have to look and see what Western's fuel cost was for that month. I add all of those together and you'll see in March that it cost me 4.165 cents, considerably cheaper than even my home charging. That's why you'll see I charge as frequently as I can at the cheapest location. That's why you see all of those dates and times. This is level 2 charging. It doesn't have an impact on my battery. Charging from 70 to 80 or whatever, I just go ahead and try to fill up while I'm there. Again, it's level 2 charging, not level 3 that is limited to the amount of time you really want to charge up to. So, but notice those numbers on the right. I get 46 kilowatt hours. It cost me $1.94. Point I want to point out, go to the bottom of that category. Notice that it cost me $24.95 for all of those charging stations, and I bought 599 kilowatt hours. Again, significant different when the rate signal gives you a clear time to charge the vehicle and it's all off peak and you're buying off peak energy. Same thing's true if you'll go back up, Howie. Let's look at that home charging. Again, about 475 kilowatt hours, even though it cost me 6 cents, significantly different than what we're about to go through. Let's roll down to the public charging I had that month. Every time that I pulled into a public charging location, I tracked the location, I tracked where it was setting, the level that was there. Believe it or not, there is public charging. Sometimes I have to put that's level 2. Even had to put some in as a level 1. I put who the provider is, the number of kilowatt hours, and then last but not least, what I paid per kilowatt hour. Notice I'm paying 52 to 56 cents a kilowatt hour, almost 10 times what I'm paying when I'm charging at workplace charging or home charging. Even at that, the numbers still only come up to 48. Shows an average of 53 or $45.08, giving me an average cost of around 53 cents a kilowatt hour for public charging. All I do is once this is done, all of this information links down to this summary that we have at the bottom of the page. Now you're able to see how many kilowatts I had from home charging, workplace charging, public charging. Shows me the total number of kilowatt hours that I had that month. Okay. Then it goes in and it'll shows what my average cost was for each. Shows what the average cost was for all of it total, and then gives the average miles per kilowatt hour. One important factor to look at is on the far right, column E. Those percentages go hand in hand with how much the actual percentage savings is that we're going to look at the bottom. The higher percentage of home and workplace charging that you do within a month, obviously at a much lower cost, the higher percentage of your savings that you will see that particular month. Okay. You'll see that reflect as we look below. So we now have what it cost me to drive my my Lightning. Now let's look and see what it cost to drive my old corporate vehicle, which was a 2019 GMC. Same number of miles. I know what my average miles per gallon on that vehicle was because I tracked it for the 3 years that I drove it. I'm able to clearly see how many gallons of gasoline equivalent I would have bought. And then I go to a website and get the cost of gasoline for the state of Oklahoma on the average. Okay. This is the best that I can do to keep everything consistent from month to month. You can do some quick math and it shows that that month to drive 249 miles, I would have spent $353.01. That's if that truck would have got that average miles per gallon. Now, again, it's simple math. $353 driving the ICE vehicle, $98 driving the EV, and this is fuel savings only, $254 that month, which equates to a 72% savings for the month of March. Each month, as you can see across the tabs of the bottom of the worksheet, I track every month. You can click on April or May or any of them. Each month comes up with the savings that you have at the bottom, and that is linked over to the year-to-date savings, which is your first tab. You can see in January, 69, 69, 72. Then you get to April and you go, wow, why did you have 27%? Look to the right. I had 33% home charging, but 60% of my charging that month came from public charging. Okay.
I really think that if a person can keep this public charging column down, if this column here can stay as low as possible, I think they're going to see some significant savings. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, it's a great point. Just go down to line 8, June. There is a month that's very typical, not of me as a driver and my driving habits because I use it corporately, but statistics show that the average EV driver charges from home 90% of the time. Look at the economics that month. I charge 90% at home, 10% at workplace, 89% savings, zero public, 89% savings that month.
That's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
It's huge. And again, that's what a typical EV, we're looking at this as a corporate driver, and I'm very unique in that my corporate driving, Western has several pool cars that, believe it or not, this is the type of savings we're seeing on those pool cars. And the reason is those pool cars have been directed to be driven less than 175 miles. The reason that's the key number, even though the range on the vehicle is 238, is the vehicle can get to where it's going and back round trip 175. Therefore, all of the charging that goes into the vehicle is at that workplace charging rate at 4 cents. So again, I'm unique in the fact that I'm kind of a horse soldier, and I drive out in the field and I'm required, because I've drove over what I can get there and get back, and I have to stop and get some of this public charging. But you can see the impact it has. At the bottom, this is where you see the total for where we're at. And I have to admit, Howie, the first, when I sent the column out, that column was due July the 5th, and I didn't have all my June data at that point. But when I finalized it, if you'll notice under column D, I saved year to date driving Bolt versus that GMC truck, $933.87. If you take into account that I'm just under 10,000 miles, and if you equate every 5,000 miles you do an oil change, I don't know what you pay for your oil change, but it's got to be somewhere between 50 and 75. You're well over $1,000 in savings just within the first 6 months. If this holds true, we'll be looking, as I drive the vehicle more like I typically would. Remember, as the column stated during this time frame, I was off recovering from surgery for 6 weeks and had an extended vacation. So almost 2 months that this savings doesn't represent. That savings would probably been more like $1,500 to $1,600.
Easily, especially with you average it somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000 miles a month, which most normal drivers are not going to average that much. But if you have someone that's commuting back and forth to work and they're driving 60 or 70 miles, which is not unheard of, one way, then they're putting 140 miles a day times 5. They're getting close to almost 1,000 miles a week.
Yeah. And again, for those individuals, because they're able to get that vehicle back to and fro, that round trip, they're going to be in that 89% savings mechanism. Like I said, I equate this of driving an EV as being a tool. If the tool fits on how you're going to use it, it's a perfect match. But for some people, it may work. It's like I said, we've been phrasing all EVs might not be right for everybody, but they might be right for some. Another interesting dynamic for me and my driving habit, look at the bottom. When you look at, I'm pretty balanced. 47% of my charging on average came from home. 34% of that came from workplace and 19 public. And that just shows the dynamic of where we are. One last thing I want to point out, if you look at my savings, it shows that year to date it's 65, and that's exactly what I incurred. But two things if you look at April was a really unique month. I had a long road trip the first week, and then I didn't drive the vehicle at all for the rest of the time, just a very little bit. So 60% was there. Well, that equated to a 27% savings for that month. And since I'm looking at this as monthly savings and then averaging those monthly savings, 1 month with an abnormal number kind of skews these results. The same can be said of looking at line 8. That was an abnormal month. That was a month that I was recovering an 89% savings there. Why? 90% of my charging came from home charging. And that particular month, OG&E had a very attractive fuel rate. Many things worked well in June. And so you can see I had no public charging for that month and I got a big deal. So the reason I bring it up, maybe a more realistic look for me, if things were normal, might be taking a 4-month average, kicking that high and that low out so that you could see something that's more realistic in my driving habits. And if you do that, it would equate to a 71% savings instead of the 65% savings that the actual data shows.
Let's take a look, Mark, at that April, all of this sheet. So let's look at all of these public charging. Just walk us through some of this stuff here on our public charging.
Yeah, this was actually the month that I took the road trip from hell. The one that if you read it, I had to spend 3 hours doing some level 2 charging and I had a gap in public charging because it hadn't been developed yet in the Clovis Portellus area. And I had to set and use level 2 charging for about 3 hours. But you can look, this is basically that trip. I stopped in Eric at a Love's that sat right on the highway. It was an Electrify America station, about 58 kilowatt hours. That took me to about 80%, and I paid 56 cents a kilowatt hour for that, $32. And if you read that column, you're going to see that when I got back from this trip, there wasn't a lot of savings. If you look towards the bottom, you can see that if for the same number of miles, go ahead and go to that. For the same number of miles, there wasn't that much difference. $268 versus $197 for the month. But on that trip by itself, it was probably only $5 or $10 cheaper to drive the EV. So you got to ask yourself, well, why would you do that? Well, I'm a unique driver. Not very many people are going to use public charging 4 times in one day to get to where they're going. But if you go back to that area, I do think it's interesting to look at it. That's kind of coming and going. One of the public charging sites, that line item 29, was in Roswell, New Mexico. It was a New Mexico Department of Transportation. The provider was ChargePoint. One of my favorites on the way back, I stayed there at the Mountain of the Gods, which is where I was speaking at a cooperative meeting. Look at that price, guys.
You don't always get it free, but free is my favorite 4-letter word.
Free works real well for me. And you know what I found interesting, several hotels, when you look at the average cost in this sheet, free electricity in the early stages of this have kind of skewed the overall summer. We'll go back and look at that as our last point. But what these hotels will do, they won't charge you anything. They make you charge that vehicle after a certain period of time. And as a result, they use that as something to entice me to want to stay there if I'm an EV driver. And Howie, let me tell you something, giving me free electricity that I'm on 100% full when I leave the next morning and making extremely convenience for me and not charging me any more in my lodging rate makes me go, I want to stay there more. And it's interesting, even if not, some of these same entities are using this to generate revenue. They may charge me 30 cents, which I think is a bargain to charge up overnight instead of 56. And as a matter of fact, if you'll look, the Staybridge Hotel on line 32, that's a hotel that's charging, they charge 35 cents, and you think that's a bargain compared to 56. I don't care how long it took because I'm parked there overnight.
Exactly. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind as EV drivers are getting more and more abundant on the road, is if you can get, it's no different than there were apps that would give you the cheapest price of gas. If you compare one hotel and across the street at 3 hotels were rated the same, you're going to pick the one that's got the free charging for the most part.
Absolutely. And so it's like I said, this is a revenue generator for them because, and let me tell you that particular hotel, I've stayed there a couple of times now, the charging fills up every night. And you're sitting there charging on that. And you're kind of disappointed if you get there late, but you're paying 35 cents instead of 56. It's convenient because you're already at the hotel. but they're not paying 35 cents a kilowatt hour. That's all nighttime energy. They're just buying that for energy and fuel of whatever's on their electric bill. So that gives them the ability to actually generate some additional revenue for the hotel. It's very interesting. Let's take one last spin. Let's go back to that year-to-date savings because there's a point I want to make. When you look at the bottom line on that, on the monthly average cost per kilowatt, you're going to see that it shows my public charging at 36 cents. Okay, again, not 10 times higher, as I'd said earlier, but still significantly higher than what I've experienced today. You ask yourself, why? Okay, early on, January, February, March, many of the companies that I signed up for their public charging gave me free energy. Some will give me your first charge free. Some gave you a specified number of kilowatt hours, like 300. Well, that don't seem like a lot, but 300 kilowatt hours that I got from Ford Blue with their charging system when I bought that vehicle, that's 4 free charges. Well, I had to include that in the data because it was real, it was free. But the point I'm trying to make, all the freebies are over now, except for charging that I get at a hotel that I can find that's free or a little cheaper that will bring this public charging average down. I have to also thank my co-op brethren out there. Some of the co-ops have level 2 charging that when I visited them, they just allow me to plug in and get for free, which is greatly appreciated. But I've tracked all of that to what I actually saw. The point I'm trying to make, and I apologize for going so far around the bend, what I'm really seeing now is more somewhere an average of around 53 cents per kilowatt hour. If you'll go back to March, that's fairly typical of what we're seeing now. When you look at public charging, you'll see a 52, a 56. It's all above 50 cents for DC fast charging. You'll find some level 2 in the 36 cent range. But if you go DC fast, I'm just telling you, it's not cheap and it's not as fast as you would hope.
It's the convenience that you're paying for, is that you can get to that 80 to 90% mark in 20 to 40 minutes, as opposed to a level 2 taking 6 to 8 hours, which is very convenient when you're asleep, not so convenient when you're trying to get where you're going.
Well, and like this trip, I get a lot of email. And as I've told you in other columns, Howie, I will do phone calls or I'll check my email or something. On that particular trip that we talked about, I had to stop 4 times to charge. Even I don't have 2.5 hours of email and phone calls. And you know what I'm saying? And so it just became a little burdensome. This is one of the things that I find interesting. Even as EVs expand, I'm not sure that average American wants to do cross-country trips having to spend that type of time delay each time. It's very different to drive out, work, and have to do 1 DC fast to get home for that day, compared to having to stop and charge 4 times, taking 20 to 35 minutes a pop, sometimes more than that. Yeah, I can grab a meal during one of them. I can check email, but it stretches it trying to figure, especially if you have to stop somewhere for 3 hours.
Thank you, Mark, for joining us. Appreciate you stopping in. And if you'd like some more information, you can visit the previous post on the Mark Smiles page. You can visit the January through August tabs, and you can have some of that information spilled out. Mark, thank you a lot.
Hey, Howie, thanks. And I want to make one point. Be checking the next couple of columns. Next month, Howie and I are going to have some cool videos pulling stuff. We're going to be pulling a horse trailer with horses in it. We're going to be doing some neat stuff to kind of see how this truck performs under things that people normally do out in rural areas.
This isn't the little bitty baby EV, folks. This is a real F-150 truck, and we're going to be putting it through its paces. Till next time, I'm Howie Jackson with Mark Faulkenberry, and you've been listening to Mark Smiles.